Chapter 1. Human Rescues Alien Child. I awoke to the acrid smell of burning circuits and the harsh glare of emergency lights flickering inside the cockpit. My ship, the Endeavour, had crash-landed on an unknown alien planet. The control panels were a mess of sparking wires and shattered screens. I tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my side, probably a cracked rib. The ship's AI, barely operational, sputtered out a diagnostic. Damage critical. Immediate repairs required. I sighed, looking out through the cracked viewport at the dense, alien forest beyond. The trees were unlike anything I'd seen before, massive, with iridescent leaves that shimmered in hues of blue and green. The planet's atmosphere seemed breathable, according to the ship's sensors. That was a small mercy. After a few hours of scavenging through the wreckage for supplies, I managed to put together a basic survival kit and a portable force field device. I had no idea how long it would be before I could repair the ship, or if I even could. The thought of being stranded here indefinitely was terrifying. With no other option, I ventured into the forest. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of alien wildlife echoed around me. Each step felt like a gamble, but I needed to find water and food. As I pushed deeper into the forest, I heard a high-pitched scream that sent a chill down my spine. Instinctively, I ran toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. Bursting through a thicket, I stumbled upon a scene that froze me in my tracks. A small, fangy child, no more than 6 years old by my estimation, was cornered by a massive predator. The creature had 6 legs, each ending in razor-sharp claws, and its eyes glowed a menacing red. Without thinking, I activated my force field device. A shimmering barrier sprang up around the child just as the predator lunged. The beast collided with the force field, recoiling in confusion and rage. I pulled out my plasma pistol and fired a warning shot. The blast scared the predator off, and it disappeared into the underbrush with an angry roar. The child, trembling, looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. Their skin was a deep shade of green, dotted with bioluminescent spots that flickered softly. They had large, expressive eyes and delicate, pointed ears. I knelt down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, though I doubted they understood my language. The child nodded hesitantly, still trembling. I offered my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, they took it. As we made our way back through the forest, I noticed movement in the trees above us. Curious eyes watched from the shadows. Soon, an entire group of Fangi appeared, surrounding us. They were cautious, but their eyes held a mix of awe and curiosity rather than hostility. An elder stepped forward, clearly a leader, with ornate markings on his skin and a staff adorned with what looked like precious stones. He spoke in a melodic, unfamiliar language. I held up my hands in a universal gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," I said slowly, hoping my tone conveyed my intentions. The elder seemed to understand. He gestured for me to follow, and we walked together toward their village. The Fangi settlement was a marvel of primitive ingenuity, huts made from woven vines and leaves, communal fire pits, and intricate carvings depicting their history and mythology. As we entered the village, the Fangi gathered around, whispering excitedly and pointing at me. I realized they had witnessed the entire rescue. The elder raised his staff, and the crowd fell silent. He spoke again, this time addressing the villagers. Their eyes widened, and they began to murmur in reverence. I caught the word God, repeated several times. It became clear they thought I was some kind of divine being. I tried to protest, but the elder silenced me with a gentle hand on my shoulder and led me to the largest hut, clearly a place of honor. Inside, the Fangi offered me food and water, and I finally had a chance to catch my breath. The child I had saved stayed close by, their eyes never leaving me. The elder sat across from me and spoke slowly, as if trying to bridge the language gap. You protect, child. We thank. I nodded, understanding the gist. I'm just a traveler, I said. My ship crashed. I need to repair it. The elder seemed to grasp my predicament. He spoke to the other Fangi, and they nodded in agreement. They would help me, at least for now. As night fell, I lay on a makeshift bed, staring up at the stars through the gaps in the hut's roof. The weight of my situation finally hit me. I was stranded on an alien planet, revered as a god by its inhabitants, with a broken ship and a million questions swirling in my mind. But one thing was clear. I had saved a life today, and that meant something. The Fangi had taken me in, and for now, that was enough. Tomorrow, I would begin to understand this new world and its people. And maybe, just maybe, I would find a way home. Chapter 2: Dilemma of Intervention. As the days turned into weeks, the initial awe the Fangi held for me began to evolve into something more nuanced. I found myself spending countless hours observing their way of life, their culture, and their traditions. The Fangi lived in a symbiotic relationship with their environment. Their tools and methods were primitive but effective. They relied heavily on what the planet provided, using rudimentary farming techniques and basic medical herbs for their ailments. The ethical implications of my presence and potential influence weighed heavily on my mind. One evening, as I sat by the communal fire, Elder Carta approached me. Her eyes, deep and wise, seemed to pierce through my very soul. "Alexander," she began, her voice a blend of curiosity and caution, "you possess knowledge and power we cannot fathom. Why do you hesitate to share it with us fully?" I took a deep breath, trying to frame my thoughts. "Elder Carta, your people have thrived here for generations without my intervention. Introducing advanced technology could disrupt your way of life, possibly causing more harm than good." She nodded slowly, contemplating my words. "But surely, there are ways to help without changing who we are fundamentally?" Her question lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. The next morning, I decided to take small steps. I began by introducing basic medical treatments. Using the portable medkit from my ship, I treated a few common ailments that had plagued the Fangi for years. The results were immediate and transformative. Word spread quickly, and soon, a line of Fangi formed outside the tent where I conducted treatments. One day, as I was treating a young Fangi with a severe infection, Zach, a prominent figure in the village, stormed in. His face was a mask of anger and suspicion. "What are you doing, Alexander?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the tent. "You're meddling with things you don't understand. Our ways have sustained us for centuries. We don't need your foreign interventions." I looked at him calmly. "Zach, I'm only trying to help. This child would have died without treatment." Zach's eyes narrowed. "And what will happen when you leave? How will we sustain these changes you've brought?" He turned to leave, but not before adding, "Mark my words, Alexander. Not everyone is as welcoming of your presence as you might think." His words struck a chord. As much as I wanted to help, I couldn't ignore the potential long-term consequences of my actions. Nevertheless, I decided to introduce simple agricultural techniques next. With the help of a few willing Fangi, we set up an irrigation system that maximized their crop yield. The difference was astonishing. The Fangi, who once struggled with food scarcity, now had an abundance of resources. However, Zach's faction grew increasingly vocal. They feared the changes I was bringing and saw me as a threat to their traditional ways. One evening, while I was exploring the outskirts of the village, I stumbled upon a hidden cave. Inside, I found resources that could potentially help repair my ship. The discovery was a double-edged sword. Repairing my ship meant I could leave this planet and return to Earth, but it also meant diverting my focus from aiding the Fangi. That night, I confided in Kira, the young Fangi child I had saved and who had since become my loyal companion. Kira, I found something today. I began, trying to gauge her reaction. Resources that could help me repair my ship and go home. Her eyes widened, a mix of excitement and fear. You mean you can leave us? I nodded slowly. Yes, but it also means I might not be here to help you anymore. She looked down, her expression thoughtful. You've done so much for us, Alexander. But maybe it's time we start learning to help ourselves, too. Her words resonated deeply with me. The Fangi needed to learn self-reliance, but they also deserved a chance at a better life. The dilemma was far from resolved, but one thing was certain. Whatever decision I made would have profound consequences for both me and the Fangi. Chapter 3. Growing Influence and Conflict. From the moment I had saved that young Fangi child from the jaws of a deadly predator, my life had taken a turn I could never have anticipated. My advanced technology, which had once seemed so mundane to me, now appeared almost magical to the Fangi. They looked up to me with wide, reverent eyes, their admiration palpable. It was an odd feeling, being seen as a godlike figure. I wasn't sure if I could ever get used to it. As weeks turned into months, I began integrating more deeply into Fangi society. Their culture, while primitive by human standards, was rich and complex in its own right. I found myself deeply conflicted about how much I should intervene. I had already introduced basic medical treatments and simple agricultural techniques, which had a noticeable impact on their quality of life. The Fangi were quick learners and adapted to new methods with surprising agility. Yet, with progress came pushback. Zack, the leader of a rival faction, grew increasingly vocal about his distrust of me and my influence. He saw me as a threat to their traditional ways, and his followers echoed his sentiments. The village began to feel like a powder keg, and I feared it was only a matter of time before it exploded. Alexander, the elder Fangi named Haruka, approached me one evening as I tinkered with a broken piece of my ship. The council has been talking. There's concern about Zack and his followers. I sighed, setting down my tools. I know. I can feel the tension growing every day. Haruka nodded, his eyes filled with worry. Zack's not just talking anymore. He's organizing. We fear he might be planning something drastic. As if on cue, the young Fangi child I had saved, whom I had come to call Lyra, dashed into my makeshift workshop. Alexander. Zack's followers were seen near the storage huts. They were sneaking around. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Thank you, Lyra. Stay close to me. We need to be prepared. The days that followed were tense. Zack's faction became bolder, their hostility more overt. I tried to mitigate the situation, holding meetings with the elders and attempting to communicate with Zack directly. But each attempt seemed to fall on deaf ears. Zack was steadfast in his belief that my presence was a corruption of their way of life. One fateful night, the confrontation boiled over. I was in the village square, demonstrating a new irrigation technique to a group of Fangi, when shots erupted from the outskirts of the village. Zack and his followers had launched an attack, aiming to steal the technology one had introduced and overthrow my influence. Lyra, get to safety. I yelled as I activated a force field to protect the villagers. Chaos ensued. Zack's faction clashed with my supporters, and the air was filled with the sounds of conflict, cries of pain, the clash of weapons, and the hum of my technology. I spotted Zack in the melee, his eyes filled with fury. You don't belong here, human, he shouted, charging at me with a spear. I dodged his attack, using a stun device to subdue him momentarily. Zack, this isn't the way. We can find a solution together. But his followers were relentless. The battle raged on, and despite our efforts to minimize harm, casualties mounted on both sides. It was a brutal reminder of the fragility of peace and the destructive power of fear and mistrust. By dawn, the village was in shambles. Zack had been captured, but the cost had been high. The village was divided, and the wounds, both physical and emotional, ran deep. I stood amidst the wreckage, my heart heavy with the weight of my choices. Haruke approached me, his expression solemn. "What will you do now, Alexander?" I looked around at the devastated village, the faces of the Fengi filled with a mix of relief, grief, and uncertainty. "We rebuild," I said firmly. "We find a way to heal and move forward. And we prepare for whatever comes next." As I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that this conflict was but a precursor to even greater challenges ahead. The ancient AI threat I had yet to uncover loomed on the horizon, and I knew that the decisions I made now would shape the future of the Fengi and possibly the entire galaxy. Chapter 4: War and Resolution. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of impending doom that hung over the village like a dark cloud. The once peaceful community had transformed into a battleground, with makeshift barricades and defensive positions hastily constructed by my allies. The Fengi I had come to care for were now preparing for war, driven by a conflict that felt increasingly inevitable. I stood at the center of the village, surrounded by my closest supporters. The Fengi child I had saved, now a young warrior named Lyra, stood by my side, her eyes filled with determination. "We must be ready, Alexander," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil around us. "Zack's forces are gathering. They will attack soon." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. "I know, Lyra. We must defend ourselves, but we must also try to find a way to end this without more bloodshed." The echoes of war drums began to reverberate through the forest, signaling the approach of Zack's faction. I activated my wrist-mounted holographic display, issuing commands to deploy our advanced defenses. Energy shields flickered to life around the village, and automated turrets whirred into position, ready to repel the attackers. The first wave of Zack's forces emerged from the tree-line, their faces painted with the determination of those who believed they were fighting for their way of life. They charged forward, weapons raised, and the clash of battle began. The air was filled with the sounds of conflict, shouts, cries, and the hum of energy weapons. Amidst the chaos, I found myself face to face with Zack. His eyes burned with hatred as he swung a crude, jagged blade at me. I parried with my energy shield, the force of the impact sending vibrations up my arm. "This ends now, Zack," I shouted, trying to reach through the fog of his anger. "You have no place here, human." Zack spat, his voice filled with venom. "You have poisoned our people with your false promises and technology. We will reclaim our home." Our battle was fierce, a clash of ideologies as much as physical strength. I fought not just for my survival, but for the future of the Fengi, hoping to find a way to bridge the divide that had torn the village apart. As the fighting raged on, I could see the toll it was taking on both sides. Friends and neighbors were falling, the village being torn apart by the very people who had once lived in harmony. Finally, with a decisive strike, I disarmed Zack, sending his blade clattering to the ground. My chest heaved with exertion as I stood over him, energy weapon at the ready. "It's over, Zack. Surrender, and we can find a way to rebuild together." Zack glared up at me, his defiance flickering for a moment before he slumped in defeat. "You may have won this battle, Alexander, but the war for our souls is far from over." With Zack captured, the fighting gradually subsided. His followers, seeing their leader defeated, began to lay down their arms. The village was a scene of devastation, but the immediate threat had been quelled. I ordered my allies to tend to the wounded, both ours and theirs, hoping to begin the process of healing the rift between us. The traditionalist Fangi elders, however, were not so easily swayed. They gathered in the center of the village, their expressions grim as they demanded justice. "Zack has caused too much harm," Elder Kor said, his voice trembling with emotion. "He must be executed for his crimes." I stood before them, my own heart aching with the weight of their words. "Killing Zack will only deepen the divide between us," I argued. "We must show mercy, give him a chance to atone for his actions. Rehabilitation, not execution, is the path to true healing." The elders were divided, their faces a mixture of anger and contemplation. After a tense deliberation, they reluctantly agreed to my proposal. Zack and his most extreme followers were exiled, sent to live in the wilderness, away from the village they had sought to control. As the days passed, the village slowly began to rebuild. The scars of the conflict were still fresh, but there was a glimmer of hope that, perhaps, we could find a way to move forward together. The lingering resentment and distrust were challenges I knew we would face for a long time to come, but I was determined to see it through. Late one evening, as I stood at the edge of the village, looking out at the stars, Lyra approached me. "Do you think we can ever truly heal, Alexander?" she asked, her voice filled with the uncertainty of a young leader. I placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "It won't be easy, Lyra, but with time, patience, and understanding, I believe we can. We must continue to work together, to learn from one another. Only then can we build a future worth fighting for." As we stood there, gazing up at the infinite expanse of the universe, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. My journey on this alien planet had taken me through trials and tribulations I could never have imagined, but it had also given me a new family, a new home. And as long as there was hope, I knew I would fight to protect it. Chapter 5: New Threat and Final Decision. The discovery was purely accidental. As I wandered through the outskirts of the village, my mind racing with thoughts of rebuilding and reconciliation, I stumbled upon a hidden cave. The dense foliage concealed its entrance, and I might have missed it entirely if not for the faint hum emanating from within. Curious, I ventured inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air grew cooler, and the cave walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. "Stay close," I whispered to the Fangi child, Aaron, who had become my loyal companion. His wide eyes mirrored my own sense of apprehension and wonder. As we delved deeper, the cave opened into a vast chamber. In the center, bathed in an otherworldly glow, was a massive, ancient AI. Its form was unlike anything I had ever seen, ornate, almost organic in design, yet unmistakably mechanical. Symbols and runes, long forgotten by time, adorned its surface. "Alexander," a voice echoed, startling us both. It was not Aaron's voice, but the AI's, speaking directly into my mind. "I have been waiting." What are you?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. "I am the Sentinel," the AI replied. "I was created by the Rosari civilization to protect and guide. But my creators fell to their own hubris, and I have remained dormant until now." Aaron clutched my arm, his gaze fixed on the AI. "Is it dangerous?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to find out." The AI continued, "The galaxy is in peril. My sensors detect the resurgence of a malevolent force, one that led to the Rosari's downfall. It threatens all life, including your own." The weight of the revelation hit me like a tidal wave. The Fangi were on the brink of internal collapse, and now an interstellar menace loomed over them, and possibly the entire galaxy. I knew I had to act, but the path was far from clear. Days turned into weeks as I worked tirelessly, using the knowledge imparted by the Sentinel to prepare the Fangi for the impending threat. We fortified the village, trained warriors, and developed new technologies. The process was exhausting, but I couldn't afford to rest. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a crimson glow over the village, a distant rumble reached our ears. A ship, a human rescue crew, had arrived. My heart leapt with hope and dread in equal measure. Alexander. A familiar voice called out as I approached the landing site. It was Commander Harper, my old friend and colleague. We've been searching for you for months. It's time to go home. My mind raced. Earth, safety, familiarity, all beckoned to me. But as I looked back at the Ferengi, especially Eren, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. Harper noticed my hesitation. What's wrong? We need to leave before nightfall. This planet is too dangerous. I can't, I stammered. There's something here, something bigger than us. The Ferengi need me. The galaxy needs me. Harper's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? You're choosing to stay on this primitive planet over coming home. I glanced at Eren, who stood silently by my side, his eyes full of trust and hope. Yes, I said firmly. I have a duty here. The disappointment in Harper's eyes was palpable, but he nodded. You always were one for the impossible, Alex. Just be careful. As the rescue crew departed, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I had made my decision. That night, under a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, I addressed the Ferengi. A new threat looms over us. I began, my voice steady. But together, we will face it. We will fight for our survival, for our future. The Ferengi cheered, their spirits lifted by the promise of unity and resilience. Eren stood by my side, his small hand gripping mine tightly. In the shadows, the Sentinel's eyes glowed with a newfound purpose. The ancient AI had stirred, and an epic battle was on the horizon. But for now, we were ready. We were one. And as I looked out over the faces of the Ferengi, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my home now, and I would protect it with everything I had.